welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be covering some of the new middle turn features for version 28. Okay, so the first thing we're going to go through is obviously our little PowerPoint presentation right now, just kind of give you guys some outline of what we're going to be covering. If you guys can hear me though, go ahead and indicate by the raising of the hand on the GoToWebinar toolbar. Alright, now the other thing too is if you have any questions that pertain to the topics we are covering while we're going through the webinar, please go ahead and try to type those out. I'll try to answer them as fast and as best as possible as we're going through everything. If not, I'll have to stop for a second and obviously answer the question. So, next, here's the overview. Today we're just picking 5 key topics for getting started with CAM programming in multitasking machining environments. The topics we'll cover is setting up a mill turn machine, loading tools and adapters, using sub-machines, face milling and cross milling. Just setting up the actual mill turn machine itself. Obviously going through how, where we put the kinematics in, all that stuff, so you guys can kind of see how that will function, how that correlates to working with your post properly, so you're properly outputting the proper code. The adapter library and tool library is really nice because now we actually have the adapter library and the turret set up so that you guys can actually go ahead and define all your adapters and your tooling. And then you have using sub-machines, which is obviously going ahead and the actual sub-spindle itself. We call it sub-machine when you want to transfer over there. Face milling, obviously going ahead and machining on the face. And then cross milling is milling on the top. So we'll go over a few of these different options, kind of go through it all. I like to obviously keep it pretty basic just to give you guys a really good outline of how it works and how the flow goes from point A to point B. And then obviously the upcoming in-house or the upcoming training options and everything. We obviously have in-house or on-site options for you guys, in-house seminars, online training. The upcoming seminars that are coming up are New York, Kentucky, Tennessee, Connecticut, and Illinois. Alright, and then always to keep in mind that we have obviously standard and premium support for those people that do need support. And what's nice is obviously you have different options that you'll be able to access with standard and premium. Alright, now to switch to the screen so we can actually go ahead and start the actual webinar process in the software. What we're going to go ahead and be covering in this particular case is just the outline of everything and how it all works. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is I'm obviously going to go ahead and get us our files, and then we're going to go ahead and start off with the process. If you've never used BobCAD version 28, this is BobCAD version 28's interface. We like to keep all of our CAD options up top. We have all of our CAM options. We do everything kind of in a tree-based format, along with a lot of setup wizards to help you really navigate through everything and get everything set up the way you'd like it to be. So the first thing we're actually going to end up doing in this particular case is we're going to kind of go over, bringing in your file, getting everything situated, how you're actually going to do it, and all that good stuff. So once you bring in a file or you've drawn it in BobCAD, your next function is going to be going in and actually going right to the point where you want to go ahead and start the setup process. So under CAM defaults, you're actually going to have the ability to go ahead, choose new job, and you're going to have a mill turn function. Okay. Now, what's kind of nice about that is you get your different types of machines. With multitasking, mill turn machines, we obviously can do single turrets, single spindle, double spindle, multiple turrets, integrect style, milling head, all those options you'll be able to output. So you guys can go ahead and contact us if you're interested in adding that to your package and give us your machine make and model, and we'll give you the info for that. Okay. Now once you pick your option, you'll hit Stock Wizard, and what will happen is it'll ask you to pick your solid model. So we pick the solid, right click OK, and then we hit Next and we do the setup. What's nice is when you're using the mill turn function in particular, you guys actually have the ability to use the actual milling stock wizard that we normally use when we're doing milling operations. So the nice part is you can actually go ahead and just define pretty much all your settings and how you want it to output and all that good stuff. So we're going to go ahead and make the diameter 6 inches in this case. There it is. And then we're going to hit Next, and we're going to define XYZ0 right here in the front. Okay. Now, the key part with this is also, if you look here, you have left spindle and right. These are the options depending, obviously which that machine setup is. Is it left spindle? Is it right spindle? You guys will be able to define that stuff here. And then once you hit OK, it just loads in those settings. Okay. Now, to cover a couple of the other things before we dive into actually tool pathing parts and going through that, we're going to go over some of the basics of setting up your machine. When you go up here to CAM defaults, you're actually going to go down here to your current settings. You'll actually open up the options where you can pick your machine type. Okay. Now, when you normally purchase this, we build the post processor and we help you set these settings so that way you have everything correlating with each other. But pretty much here is where you'd go in. You'd say, okay, let's add a machine. Okay, we're going to call it our test machine. We're going to pick mill turn, and then you have user defined axes. So we're going to define, you're going to define the axes. So you hit OK, it'll load it in. Okay. The nice part too is you have machine parameters like number of tools, routed planes. But if you go down here, you actually have the machine definition. Okay. Now, what will happen is you guys will go in and actually start indicating with the axes of how you want everything, and I'm going to show you one that what it looks like, and then you have the sub machine as well. Now, what's going to happen is you're going to go down here to your posting option. This is where you would define your post, the output for it, and then you have multi-axis posting for the multi-axis functions themselves. You actually have tolerances and settings that you guys can define. Now, if we go back up here and we go back to the machine parameters and we pick one of the mill turns that we already have done, let's just say the integrix. You go down to the machine definition, as you can see, everything is defined here. Okay. So what's really nice about that is you actually have, obviously right here under the machine def, you have Z, Y, X, the holder, the turret, all this. This is the configuration of the machine. So what will actually happen if we go down here, let's just say for right here, it actually has the limits of each one of those axes and the moves. So when you're actually defining everything, you can go in, because if you want to add your own and stuff like that, you can actually bring in the solid components of the machine with the full machine sim, be able to output those and actually go ahead and define those settings and actually be able to use it the particular way you'd like to. Okay. What we're going to do now is after we get all this stuff defined, we're going to hit OK. You're going to go down in here and you actually have your machine, your post processor here. Okay. And then you have your mill turn tools here, your stock options here with your material. So we're going to blank out this, and then you also have your workpiece. Okay. Now what's nice is if you go in here and you actually say, okay, let's go to mill turn tools. When you go to the tool library, that's just your regular library where you guys can draw your tooling, load all your end mills in there, load all your lathe tools as well in there. Okay. Just so you guys can kind of see, when you go into one of the tool options and you hit add, it's pretty simple. Depending on what the subcategory of the tool is that you'd like, you just pick that, and then you're just going to define the tool and the parameters for that particular tool. Now the nice part is once you exit out of there and you hit OK, you then will right click down here on the actual tool grip. Okay. This is where you'll actually find the turret itself. So based on the definition of everything, this is where you're going to be able to add your adapters, the tooling together, and everything like that. And then obviously there's an adapter library that we'll go to in a second as well. But what will actually happen is you have your stations of your tool turret. You right click on a station, you hit add adapter. You pick whatever type of adapter you want to use, right? And what it does, it will bring that adapter in, and then it allows you to position it where it actually sits on your turret. So, in this particular case, if I wanted just to move it down, let's just say, I look at the X is going this direction. So what we do is go to X and say, like, let's go 2 inches. It's moved it down now to where it's sitting right there. Okay? So depending on how you want to output it and how you want to do those particular settings, you can define those in here for yourself with the adapters, and then all you do is after you assign the adapter to your stations, you then will right click on the adapter itself, go down to add a tool, and then you'll just go in and pick a tool from your library. It snaps that tool, and then you obviously, like, end mills will have options 1 through 4 that you can define, so it has different options, different ways it can sit, okay, right? And then obviously on the lathe options you have the same type of options as well, okay? They'll just be lathe settings, so just so you guys can see, let's add an adapter for a lathe. Alright, there's that one. Okay. We can reposition it, so let's move it up next 1 inch. No, let's go negative. And then let's move over Z. Okay. And then you can attach your lathe tools to it. And this is what it looks like when you add a lathe tool. You'll have the tool there, and you can position the tool as well. You can slide it down in the holder, and then you have position 1 through 8. Alright. So that's pretty much how the adapters actually work and how you define it. We can go over here ourselves, like I said, and you guys can actually start shifting these. The tool to sit in the proper location you need it to be on there. Okay. And some of your adapters may have two tool options where you can actually assign 2 tools to the same adapter. That's why you have the adapter stations option, where you can actually go in and do that as well. Now the nice part is you also have the automatic tool ID, or you have tool numbering where you guys can go ahead and define that. Let's exit out of there. Once you set that up too, you guys can save that turret setting, and that way you guys can reload it again and again into other files, so that way you wouldn't have to do that each and every time. The only time you'd really have to do it after you did it the initial time was if you were changing out tools or something like that. Now what I'm going to do here is, after I've defined that, let's go down to that adapter library. Okay. So you have all your adapters. You can say add an adapter, okay? And you can also add a category, so you guys can categorize and add, okay? The nice part about this is you can go ahead and type in what you want, size-wise, and create it. You can go in here and say this is going to be 1 inch by, and you can actually make the width start being what it is, and you guys can adjust the adapter, okay? And then you can put the mounting location where it mounts. But the other thing is that you guys can obviously just create a CAD drawing of it, or get a CAD drawing, save it as an STL, and once you can load that STL file into the system, okay? And that's probably the one avenue we'll go, just so you guys can see it, okay? So what's really nice is, obviously there's a lot of setup, setting everything up, so let's go ahead and dive into the adapter portion first. So I'm going to make a pretty quick adapter, just a simple basic one. I'm going to put a rectangle, let's do 1 inch. Okay. Place it here. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and use utilities, trimming it, quick trim it, and I'll just trim away. So you guys can do, your own CAD drawings if you have your own CAD system of the adapters, or you can do it right here in BobCAD. It's not going to make a difference. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an arc to the center. And I'll go here to extrude boss, select it. We want to extrude this downward, so we're going to say 1 inch, hit OK. And then we're going to go ahead and do the extrude boss again on this one. So we pick the circle. And there we go. Okay. Now we've created a solid. Obviously it's a pretty basic, generic shape. What you're able to do is go to File, Save As, save it out as an STL. Okay, and we're going to say Tool AD. Okay, and then what we do is we go back in here to the actual part file. We're going to go back to our adapter library. We're going to say Add Adapter, Load STL, go to our desktop where we saved it. Right there, and load it in. Boom. And just like that, you actually have that adapter now that you guys can go in and pick from and define and use over and over again. Now, what we're going to do is, after we got that done, you guys can also go in and add, tool mounting positions as well. So you have tool mounting position 1 right there. You guys can adjust it and move it to a different location. That's what that little coordinate grid is actually going in and, making everything. So the nice part is, if I go ahead, and if I want to, I can say add another tool mounting position, and I can actually move it over in X 1 inch, go down in Z -0.5, and I can change where it is, where that coordinate system set is, where the actual initial tool mounting position will be. Now the nice part too, after we have all that stuff pretty much defined and set, we can go ahead and hit OK. We're going to exit out of there, and now we're actually going to start onto the programming process of everything. So, to begin with this particular case, we're going to go down here to Machine Setup. This is where we're going to activate our actual tool outputs. What's nice about it is you have your milling features and your turning features. So you're not doing anything, super complex. You're still using the same functions that you use if you use BobCAD for a regular mill and regular turning. You're just now able to actually combine them together to make your mill turn program. Now, a few things that we'll also cover too. Some of you might have a machine that has a part catcher or a programmable tailstock, or you just want to go from the main to the sub and grab the part and then turn the backside. All those callouts and stuff are actually handled manually in the system, and I'll show you guys what the MDI looks like. We call it. That's where you're able to actually output whatever you guys want hand-coded into the actual post itself. So to go ahead and actually begin with this particular setup, what we are going to do ourselves is we are going to say, okay, now that that's defined, we're going to choose, turning, lathe turning. It opens up the wizards, and the wizards are just designed to take you guys from point A to point B of setting everything up. So the nice part is you guys can actually go ahead yourself and define the rest of your settings and everything pretty quickly without having to, well, where do I go next? You just keep hitting next and filling in the data it asks for on each page. Now, once we have that defined ourselves, we will move on to the next phase. Once we move on to the next phase, we'll then be able to go ahead and do the next step. So we're going to hit Select Geometry. Now, on the milling, you can pick right off the solid. Off the turning, you still have to use a 2D sketch. I actually have the turn profile already defined. So what you can do in your particular case is you can go ahead and extract the edges of an intersection of it, and that way you guys can do it that way, or there's multiple other ways, or if you're using a different system, just make sure to save out a sketch of the profile, lathe profile as well, and that way you don't have to worry about trying to define anything in here. You'll just open the file up and go from there. Now, once we have that stuff defined, we will move on to the next phase. And the next phase is pretty much just going to be us going in, and we're going to say, okay, let's pick that, pick this here, right-click OK. Once you pick the lathe profile, you will hit Next. This is where you actually have your parameters for your actual feature settings and everything. Once I define those type of settings, I then can move on to the next phase as well. And what we're going to do is on the machine strategy is where you're going to pick what type of strategy you're going to use. Now, the nice part is you have like a face rough, turning rough, face finish, turning finish options. You can fully customize every which way of which part you want to actually do and how you want to do it. So if you were to pick turning rough, you could do a turning basic finish, you can do a turn pattern repeat. You're able to actually define however you want it to output. Now, what we're going to do is, after this, we're going to go ahead ourselves, now that we have all this stuff defined, and we're going to define the next setting and move on to the next phase. So on the next phase, we're going to say Next, and you're going to have the option for the actual turning option to choose separate moves or can cycles. Or you guys can long code it out, just depends on how you guys want to output those particular settings. Now, what we're going to do in this particular case is, now that we have all that stuff defined, and we're ready to move on to the next phase, we're going to go ahead and do the next portions of it all. We hit Next, and we're going to go down and define our tooling. So what's pretty neat is you guys can actually go in and define your tool and everything here. If you guys already click on Tool Crib, you'll actually already have your tools. You'll have loose tools if it's a new tool and it's not actually in your thing, or you can pick a tool that's already there. If it is a loose tool, all you have to do is just right-click on it, and you guys can mount it to wherever you need to. So I can pick, either an adapter or a station on the turret, and I can mount that tool. Okay, that one doesn't have a holder or anything. It's just the actual shape of the tool. Now, once you have that defined, you'll do the same. You'll hit Next, and you guys will just define your depth of cut, your Z and X allowance. So obviously how much material we're going to take off each pass, and then obviously the X and Z options as well for leaving material, so we can come in with the actual finish pass. Now once we go through there and we go through all those settings, we can actually go ahead and choose system compensation with collision detection and system comp without collision detection right here. And then you also have machine compensation right here. Once you hit next, you have your rapids. Okay. So what's nice is our default is a home position of 5 of X and Z. That's default rapid on exit. You also have default rapid to home positions and defined points. So you guys can actually do whatever you prefer, and that way you guys are defining exactly the way you'd like it to be defined. I'm then going to go ahead and hit next from there. And I have my lead in and lead outs, and this is where I can actually define specific points at which it'll lead into the material and also lead out of the material. Now, we were also talking about the part catcher subspindle. This is the MDI callout page. This is where you'll do those type of functions. You guys can add in your own tasks, line comments, your commands. These are some of the ones that are just generic, orient spindle, part catcher, part transfer, dwell, feed move, chuck clamp options. And to add one, all you do is you set up your sequence, you figure out exactly how you want to do it, and then you start adding your lines. And then what you do is you start adding commands to those particular lines. So you add the command, like in this case, that says like spindle orient, and you say, okay, well I want the subspindle to orient tool device or workpiece. If it's a workpiece, you can actually tell it a specific angle to orient to. Type it in. What that'll do is when it posts out the G code, it'll go to that particular line of that tool. Right out, and this one says after operation, and it'll reorient that particular piece. So we allow you guys to actually use the MDI on every single toolpath you do. Rough, finish, however you want to set it up. And then the nice part too is once you've set up a sequence of like, subspindle, traversing over to the main, orienting, clamping, unclamping, pulling part, all that stuff, you can actually then save it. You save it into a database, and what will happen is you guys can then load it. So for example, if I said let's just load, cut off, transfer, open, and I'm going to say, let's do it right here, hit OK. There it is, sync off, part transfer, subspindle. Okay, that's already handled. All this stuff is already done, and I don't have to worry about it. Alright, that's the neat part of that particular setup. Now, once you go ahead and you hit next, you'll go through and define the rest of the settings for the rest of the tools and everything. So you're going to go in and define, the actual finish tool itself and the settings for that particular finish tool. And then once you hit compute, it just outputs your toolpath. Okay? So there's our turning toolpath. Now let's go ahead and dive into some of the actual piece where we can go in and do some milling on this. So a lot of this is, top face milling right here, and then you also have, indexing pretty much the 4-axis and part of it, and machining the slots out. So to do stuff like that, you just go ahead and you just go right into the mill features. You'll go down here and you'll choose mill 2-axis, let's just say. We will then hit select geometry. We'll pick this front face right here. Right click OK. We will hit next, and you'll just go through the settings. Set up your rapid plane, your feed plane. You have your total depth option here. On all our 2-axis toolpaths, you guys can choose pick bottom. You guys can pick the bottom edge wherever the shape is, and it'll actually fill in the actual total depth for you. Now, the other nice side with that is once you hit next and you move on to the next page, you're going to define, profiling, pocketing, those type of options. If I choose profiling, I then have the ability to go ahead and define my settings. Once I define my tool settings, I can also go ahead and go down here to the patterns, and you're going to choose the output for those particular patterns. Now, once that's all defined, you then will go down to your actual side allowance for the milling portion. Are we going to leave material on the walls to come in with the finishing pass afterwards? Okay. Now, what we're going to do in this particular option, I'm going to go ahead myself, and you're going to choose multiple steps. We're going to hit next, and we're just going to define our lead-ins. Okay? So all those functions are going to be the same. So don't, some people, when they see something new, they're like, oh, well, how am I going to learn this? You're just using your same toolpaths. The only thing you're doing now is just defining the different settings. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit next. I'm going to hit compute and just let it default the rest. And there's our toolpath on our milling on our front face. Okay. So the nice part is you're able to actually go in and just program right off the solid right there on that face and not have to worry about a thing. Now, I'm going to go from there. Got that defined. Everything looks great. I'm going to go down and define the outside. So, we have X, Y, and Z defined here. So, we're going to have to do index systems to get to these. So, to do that, you're just going to right-click on Machine Setup, go down to Additional Functions first. You'll then go down and add an index. Once you add the index, it adds that index system. You reselect it. Once you go ahead and you select it, you'll say pick a surface, and you'll just pick one of the surfaces you want to start with. Hit OK. It indicates with an arrow. That is notifying us that that is exactly where the software is going to index to go ahead and output all of our settings. Now, after we do the index system, we right-click on the index system itself, and you just start adding your toolpath features. So I'm going to go down to Mill 2 Axis. I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, now that that's defined, okay, I'm going to move on to the next phase, and the next phase is going to be us going in here and selecting our geometry and picking just, the edge line, because if we're just going to run an end mill down it, we want to just have a straight line for it to follow. Now, once we have that stuff defined as well, we are then able to move on to the next phase. We're then going to go ahead and hit OK, and you're just going to go through the same type of settings, picking the bottom of the job, pick top, pick bottom, those options. Okay. And here's the top, and then pick bottom. It's going to be here. It's going to obviously change the depth and the top of the part. Okay. Now, once we have that defined, we then move on to the strategy type, profiling, pocketing, those type of options. We're going to go ahead and use just a profile. And we'll go down in here and define the tooling and everything as well. Now, once you have this ready and you hit compute, let's just say I defaulted, there's our toolpath there. And we would just continue. We can either toolpath pattern and wrap it around, or we can go ahead and do each individual index system for each piece. Now, once I've defined all that, I'll move on to the next phase of it all. And what we're going to do in this case is we're going to go ahead and we're going to bring up the actual part fully done, go over the simulation, cover all the stuff that it does, how it does it, posting out some code so you guys can see that as well on this particular part. So obviously, programming, I have the part already done. If I go in here and I unblink it, you guys will be able to see all the toolpath. Okay. All the different settings and everything like that. One thing to cover with you guys, when we right click here and we go down to simulation, it does launch the software simulator. You guys can, like I said, get the full machine sim, where you guys can actually go ahead and use your actual machine sim. Alright, the standard simulation will just show the turret and the part, and then if you have the full machine turned on, it'll actually showcase the machine with the turret and everything. What's nice about the full machine sim versus the regular sim is obviously you get to see that everything's moving and not colliding, and that everything's moving in the proper orientation that it should. And then you guys can obviously make adjustments to it as needed. Okay, let's get a good angle in there. We're going to go ahead and slow this thing down just a little bit, and we'll just hit play. All I did was get rid of that machine housing, by the way, so I can hide the housing portion of the machine to make it easier to see everything. So as you can see there, it's just doing its turning operation, right? And then does the finish pass, then it's doing the front face milling. the sub-spindle transfer, and then there's the backside machine. So, obviously you guys can spin this thing around, and that way you guys can actually see from the backside as well. Now, the nice part too, just to kind of speed this up so we can get all the way through it. So there it is doing all its machining, going through the backside and everything like that, doing the milling portion and everything. Finish passing that, and then it starts doing the milling here. Speed it up, boom, there we go. There's our part. Now, when you go ahead and you exit out of there, one of the neat parts is obviously posting out the code. Now, to go back on the MDI section, when we post out this G code here, I'm going to open it up in Predator for us. Okay, you have all your options. This is your regular coding, right? So, the call out for your churning features and your milling features. The big thing you do is you scroll through and you'll see all your codes and everything like that. But the big thing I want you guys to see is the MDI call out when we do the sub-spindle swap. It's right here. This is what it looks like. So right here is all the codes hand coded in. This is raw text output as well, so it actually outputs the raw text so people know what it is, what it's doing. Slow feed rate to pick up location, dwell for 1 second, air blast off, switch back to main spindle control. Those type of options that's set up to do that part transfer. That's what it actually looks like in your code. So that way you're not having to hand do it. You can actually just define everything right then and there in the actual system, not having to do it afterwards, not having to hand edit the code, unless you want to. Obviously, if you want to hand edit the code, you are more than welcome to, but eliminating a lot of steps of you having to do stuff. Now, after that, the other neat part about it is actually getting the setup for it. Okay? What I want to do here is I want to right click on the milling turn job, go down to generate setup sheet. BobCAD will actually take and output the setup sheet with obviously all the operations, all the different tools, all the setups, all the procedures that we go through, so that way you have all your stuff defined and ready to roll. Now, once we have that defined, we will exit out of there, and we can go back in here. Now, a few of the other things, if you want to know more info as well on the actual mill turn portion too, just to kind of cover this, you guys can always go to the help and the help topics portion. This is where it's actually going to give you a lot of the data that you need to know, and give you a little bit more examples of what you're actually seeing. So in here, if you go down to the CAM side, you go down to the mill turn portion, you actually have the mill turn job covering what each thing is, okay, what the breakdown is, what's the little definition of it, and then you also have the adapter library section explaining the adapters, how those work, and then it also has the mill turn tool crib, how that works, what this does, what each one of these pieces are. And then you also have your lathe wizard, mill wizard options as well, but that's what the mill turn will actually cover for you guys. It'll give you all the info you need, how to assign a workpiece, stock material selection, tool information, setup, how that all works out, how that's going to work and benefit you guys too. Now the other neat side too, just so you guys can see, I do have multiple other parts as well, and I'm going to go ahead and bring in another one for us just so we can kind of see some different stuff. So obviously that is your typical turret, sub-spindle, main spindle as well. And then obviously there are machines out there that are different, that actually have 5-axis heads, or the ability to do 5-axis, okay, with the milling. So this one in particular is another part with a lot of cross drilling, front machining, everything like that. So if we go in here, I want you guys to actually see the simulation. So let's go ahead and launch the simulator. Alright. Alright, let me mount this. Now with the 5-axis heads, just so you guys know, you have the upper head defined, okay? And then you have a turret in this case. So this is your turret, and then this is your upper head, okay? Alright, let's go ahead and mount. It's fine. Good. And then we'll mount this. Good. Okay. So after that's defined, obviously if you run into where you didn't mount a tool, you're going to have to mount them, and then you'll be able to go into the simulator. Let's go take a look at what it does. Okay, so there's the milling head, and then obviously there's your turret. This machine in this case has that. We'll go ahead and pull this over a little bit and hit play. Now, as you can see right there, there's a very interesting thing. This is really nice to have the full machine because you're checking to see if there's any collisions with the bottom, top. Did everything move out of the way? Because obviously if this was actually engaged up here and this came down, there would be a massive collision there. You get to see that type of stuff to verify that, you know, it's kind of doing what you need it to. Alright, we can speed it up just a little bit faster so we're not having to sit here all day. And you guys are able to actually watch. There it is doing its front face milling head. And then what it's doing is it's going around and doing the rest of the milling around the part. There it is doing some actual 4-axis move. Actually 5-axis move. Right. Tapering those walls that we were just doing. Alright. Speeding it up, doing the drilling, and then it's just continuing on. Subspindle change and the backside. Okay. So yes, you guys can obviously configure your guys' different machines. The whole idea for this webinar today was just kind of to give you some insight on how to start with stuff and really how to get in there. Now what we were talking about too is the subspindle is the last thing we have to, the sub machine. Right down here, when you do a machine setup, you determine whether the actual machine is your main or your left or your sub. So we want to go ahead and, like in this case, this is the main spindle, sub spindle. So when you guys define your machine setup, you're going to have the option to edit this, and then you guys are going to be able to do your sub machine selection and define if it's sub or main, and then whatever toolpath you put will calculate and simulate based off of the sub or the main spindle. Okay? So that's pretty much that. Now, the other side of this too, guys, if you guys have any questions or anything like that, you guys are able to shoot emails as well. It doesn't look like we had too many questions pop up during the webinar. I do appreciate you guys coming to take a look at some of the mill turn functions and how it works and how you can kind of get started with the multi-axis or the multitasking machines. If you do have other questions or you'd like to see more, you can always contact us. We can do a specialized demo tailored to what you're doing. If you have any questions on your particular mill turn machine, what would be the setup process and all that stuff, please go ahead and contact our support staff or us, the technicians here, and we'll be glad to answer any of your guys' questions. Okay? Now the other thing too is we are working on the next setup for the next webinar. This is a recording, so this will be available in a few days on the website. You guys will get links to it if you want to rewatch it, just to kind of see how everything went in case you missed something. Please keep track and sign up for the next one once it's available.